Okay. Wow. Do I have a lot to do right now? Um, Look, you guys know I am not a big fan of battle or history. I don't want to get into the battles. I'm less um, good at that as a teacher. I mean, I knew the way I had an administrator once when I worked at a previous school who would spend 2 months on the Civil War. And I said, how can you spend 2 months on the Civil War? Because you're breaking down the battles. Shouts to Mr. Whitley. A guy knows his battles, his war history of battles so much better than me. But we're gonna in World War II. This is the time and this is the place that we really get deep on the battles of this war. Really important subject. So we're gonna start here by saying that Germany was winning. Okay, September 1939, they invade Poland and they take Poland in 4 weeks. They split it with the Soviet Union, and mind you, the U.S. is not in the war yet. The French and the British declare war on Germany, but they're not ready. So winter comes and winter goes, and the French and the British are trying to prepare, but Hitler's ready. And in April of 1940, Hitler attacks Denmark and Norway, and he defeats them both. Let's look at these two countries on the map, okay? So here is your Germany and the area that they controlled. And here's Denmark, and here is Norway. And yes, in 1940, they're attacked and defeated by the French. I'm sorry, by the Germans. In May of 1940, he attacks Netherlands, Belgium, and France, and he defeats them. Now, don't forget, France was the country that held off Germany in World War I. The trenches were in France. The Western Front was in France. All the fighting was in France. And the French, I mean, they were kind of tired of war. Was that the main reason why? No. But that is a factor. He also did these blitzkrieg attacks where he would send like his whole army in, or maybe not his whole army. I exaggerate, but he would send in so many tanks and so many soldiers at once that he was able to attack and take over land quicker than Europe had ever seen before. And they weren't ready for it. The people weren't ready for this pace of conquest. I have here a map of the attack on France, and then I want to get deeper on it. It's really interesting and important to understand. There was this line that the French called, I don't know, the Maginot line. That's how it looks in English. Maybe it was pronounced the Magnois line. I'm not sure, but it's right here in the map. Okay, this is the heaviest section, and this is where the trenches were. And what the French said were, never again will I fight in trenches. Okay, that's not going to happen. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to build these massive, massive bunkers. Okay, and on these bunkers, we'll put them right where the trenches were, and if the Germans try and come in again, where the trenches were, we'll be ready, and we won't have to sit in trenches ever again. And they built this really fantastic series of forts that are still there. You can check them out and tour them if you ever get a chance. I hope to. And here's the thing, though. The Germans knew that these forts, the Germans knew about the Maginot line. And this is the kind of thing you would see, right? These are bunkers, oftentimes built into mountains, machine gun turrets. And it wasn't going to be a trench any longer. They were not going to fight in trenches this time. All right, I found an image that I usually use when I'm in class. And this is what the, give me a second. This is what some of these fortifications would look like. I mean, these were underground bunker system. Look, it built into a mountain, machine gun, machine gun, machine gun, machine gun, machine gun. And down here you have all the amenities of home. They have like places to sleep, and they have kitchens, and look how far the tunnel goes all the way down out the other side of the mountain. They just said, look, Germany, if you guys are going to come, We're not going to sit in trenches. We'll be comfortable when we fight you this time, and we're going to beat you. Here's another example of what the underground system looked like. These are probably, I have an example of this type of machine gun turret and defense, and underneath you can see they're all connected. There's tunnels, there's places to sleep, there's cafeterias, there's electric sources, there's everything you could need. The French were not. The French believed strongly. And here you can see, right, this kind of little dome that pops up with a machine gun. They were going to fight smarter than last time. They were determined. But here's the thing. The Germans knew about this line. So what did they do? They went through Belgium. They said, yeah, I don't think we're going to fight you there. I think we'll fight you here. And there was some forts there, but it was nothing like the line that was built up along the trenches. He goes through what's called the Ardennes Forest, and he comes in and he takes Paris, okay, in weeks. And all of a sudden, the Germans are in control of Paris. There's a famous picture, and I think I'll find it for you, of Hitler in Paris. Let me find you the picture. All right, so here it is, right? Hitler and his buddies get together, right? They're doing a selfie, right? They're going to post it on Facebook or whatever. And he's posing, man, look at him. He's leaning back. He's looking cool, man. Hitler is tough in this picture. Look at that. He took over for Paris. That's the Eiffel Tower in the background. And I don't know who these people are. Maybe I should. But maybe they're nobodies. What do I know? Well, what I do know is that Hitler took Paris, okay? And if you look here at this map, I'll do this one more time. Let's look at this map. This is the line right here, okay? He took northern France. A lot of the times people will say like, oh, he took France. No, he took northern France, but there was a line, and the French army fell back, and they fought, and they defended southern France the whole time. La Resistance, they would call themselves. They would launch attacks in France, but they were very ineffective. It was not Paris. France, I don't know. I've never been to France. I shouldn't talk like I pretend like I know, but I've read a lot, and it's very rural. There aren't a lot of big cities. The south of France is very farmland, and they had it right. The Germans had taken the industrial area, the big cities. They took Paris. That's the big city of France. So what's the U.S. doing? Well, all this is happening. Well, the U.S. president was a guy named Franklin Roosevelt. And immediately after the French lose, the British ask the U.S. for help. Remember, the Soviet Union, who was Britain's ally in World War I, is now allies with the Germans. They're alone. Britain is all alone in Europe. We're going to go back to this map again. Look at this map of Europe, okay? Here is the safe zones. Iceland. Do people live there? Of course they do. I kid, Iceland. I want to visit. Britain. And then there's some neutral countries here in gray. This area was unoccupied, you see, in France, but it's not like there was much there. There was no army there. There were just individuals. And then all of this area was controlled by France, by Germany, okay? Or they were allies of Germany, your Italy and your Eastern. Okay, so the U.S., right? What happened to that picture? The U.S. knows that all of this is happening. But Roosevelt they had passed laws. Our government was like, we are never fighting another war in Europe. Forget that. We didn't even want to be part of the League of Nations. We were mad that we had to fight in World War I. So the government had passed laws that did not allow Roosevelt to join the war. So what he had to do was he secretly sent food, supplies, and eventually soldiers to England to help them against the Germans. In the law, though, was interesting. He said, you can't give weapons to Britain, and you can't sell weapons to Britain. So he said, I will loan them weapons. And it was called the Lend-Lease Act, where he was letting them borrow weapons as a way to get them weapons. Um, some people say if it weren't for US help, Britain would have lost the war. The next major battle was for Britain, okay? Germany's going to get Britain now. They just decided it's time. And they knew that in order to get to the island of Britain, they would need to control the skies so that their ships, as they floated to Britain, would not be attacked by the skies. Now, quickly, let me just say that during this period, this is when Dunkirk takes place. If you've ever seen the movie, you shouldn't. If you haven't, you should. A bunch of British soldiers who were here got kind of stranded on the beach. Maybe it was around in this area. And then the British told all of their people who had boats, anyone who has a boat, go pick up a soldier. Go pick up a soldier. Go pick up a soldier. And regular Brits show up and they save the army. They save the war. If Hitler had attacked harder, I had a college professor who told me that he would have won the war. They would have beat Britain because so many British soldiers were there. They left all their equipment, and the men survived. Okay. And when they get home, what they find is that the Germans are ready to attack. So later that year, in August, they begin attacking the British Air Force bases. Smart. Naval bases. Smart. Communication centers. Smart. War industries. Factories. Smart. But here's where they made a mistake, is when they started attacking cities. Okay. Immediately after the first bombings, the British fight back and they bomb Berlin, right? They send their Air Force in and they bomb Berlin. Oh, by the way, the US soldiers were there helping the British. They were allowed to go in the Air Force as volunteers. So it makes Hitler mad, right? They punched him back. So instead of continuing to attack naval bases, communication centers, and war industries, he says, I'm going to make him hurt. I'm going to get London. And every night for months, the Germans bomb London. Here's a picture of London and some of the smoke rising from the attacks. The sirens would go off. The British would send their people underground in bunkers. The kids were moved to Northern Europe or Canada or the US, but they needed business to keep going in London so that they could have the money to fight this war. This is when the Chronicles of Narnia take place. That it's not real. The book was written about at this time period in Northern England. But the thing is, they call this the Blitz. Okay, nothing to do with the Rams or the Raiders. My favorite football teams. The Londoners didn't crumble. They didn't quit. They kept waking up every morning. The city had been bombed again. The Air Force, Royal Air Force, the RAF fought every night against the Germans, and they kind of won, but London still got hit hard. And they say the British have a stiff upper lip. That means you don't cry because they woke up, took out their brooms, the regular citizens cleaned up the mess, kept going, went to work, that was the key for them to survive. And after months of this, guess what? Their factories had been pumping out planes and ships and everything that they were going to need for war. And because Hitler decided to punch back at London, instead of hitting the things they needed for war, all of a sudden Britain's got more planes in the sky than Germany. They start to push German planes back. They start to win the battle of the sky over what's called, and I'm going back to my map, this area right here between London and mainland Europe. And Hitler sees it. And Hitler then calls off his invasion. Britain lived. What a day. What a victory. Go Britain. That was a tough one to have to live through. But the people did it. army did it. Our soldiers went and they helped. This is really a glorious moment for Britain. But Hitler then says, I'm going to attack the Soviets. Mistake number 2, Hitler. What are you thinking? Think you're going to try and attack Russia? Do you know better? Do you know who Russia is? This is Russia. No one invades Russia. Napoleon couldn't invade Russia. During World War One, during World War One, they never got all the way into Russia, although Russia did have a civil war. But don't mess with Russia. And if you're going to, well, we'll see mistake number 2. Let's get there. Okay, so Hitler was convinced the only reason Britain was fighting was because they thought the Soviets would eventually help them. They weren't going to. He then told Mussolini in Italy to invade Greece. Okay, he says, you guys invade Greece while we're doing other stuff. And it didn't work. Okay, the Italians were weak. Germany, again, just like in World War One, when the Austrians were weak, had to go down and help. And he invaded and conquered Greece. Of course he did. He's Hitler. He was so powerful. But what happened, instead of being able to then turn around and invade Russia in April, he has to fight the Greeks in April. Okay? And who were being helped by the British? And he waits until June. I think it's June 22nd, almost July, before he starts to invade Russia. Don't invade Russia in the winter. Come on. Everyone knows that. It's the worst thing you could do. If you're going to invade Russia, which you shouldn't do anyway, don't do it in the winter. What are you thinking? Mistake number 2, Hitler. Sorry, I had to call a professor. We used to repeat this. So he didn't want to wait a whole year. He said, I'm striking now. And as we see, they were really successful. Of course, look, they were tough, you guys. They took all of this land in Russia. Okay. There's Leningrad. That's St. Petersburg. There's Moscow. Here's Stalingrad. They took Ukraine. They took Belarus. They took Crimea. The area down here is near the Caucasus region. And they're right knocking on Moscow's door. But they get stopped. And you shouldn't be surprised to hear who stopped them. It was the Russians, who were tough. Women fought for the Russians. Like the greatest woman sniper in the world history ever was a Russian woman who just sniped all sorts of Germans. They're the only country where women were fighting. But it was winter. Winter stopped them. It was Mother Nature. And a cold winter hit the Russians that year. They only had their spring uniforms, and they had to turn back. But they didn't give up all this land, unlike Napoleon, who got pushed back immediately. They didn't just take one strip of land. They took a lot of land. So they held on to a lot of land. But starting in Moscow and in St. Petersburg, they start getting pushed back in the north. Hold on. Let me see. I'm gonna find one more here. I thought I'd set up another one. Oh, that's in a different lecture. Okay, so that'll be my next lecture. So here we sit. Okay, in Europe, and I want to clarify. I should have done this earlier. In World War II, we talked about the European theater, and then we talk about the Pacific theater. Okay, kind of weird to connect them to theaters, but whatever. European, the fighting in Europe and the fighting in the Pacific Ocean between the U.S. mostly and Japan. What we know is that in the European theater, at this point, Hitler's winning. Big time. He has all of Europe. It's his. Okay. um, except for England, which is an island. Okay, he has most of Western Russia all the way right to the border of Moscow, and he holds it. He doesn't just give it up after they lose outside of Moscow. He holds that land. In 1941 is coming to a close, and yeah, he got stopped outside of Moscow, but boy, does Hitler look like he's winning. And then something happens on December 7th, 1941, that changes this war. Why? Strategically, why would you want to bring the US in this war? Do you not know who you just brought into this war? The end of 1941 will mark a significant change in this war.